other things that antagonized colonists were other different forms of tyrannical moves to help pay for the war. Largely the Stamp Act, enacted in 1765, which, unlike the Sugar Act enacted the year before, which largely targeted New England merchants, the Stamp Act affected everybody in British North America. The Stamp Act put a tax on every printed paper or document. It could be a newspaper, pamphlets, it could be a legal document like a will. If it was to be printed and sold, it was going to have a stamp on it. So it would affix a stamp, kind of like you do on a snail mail letter. You get a stamp and you put it on the letter and the post office will send it. I wonder how many of y'all youngsters have really actually done that before. But otherwise, though, if it had any sort of printed paper document, a deed, a will, you were going to put a stamp on it. And as such, because it was so widespread, yeah, you're going to raise a significant amount of revenue. Okay? Much more so than had previously done. Okay? The problem with the Stamp Act was that it set a precedent that Parliament can levy taxes at their discretion. You are going to get taxed whether you like it or not. You're not going to have any sort of say in the matter. You're not going to be able to vote for a particular political candidate who may support a particular platform. If your candidate doesn't win, well, at least you had some sort of say in the matter. Well, in this case, you have no say whatsoever. So Parliament had used taxes as a way to kind of regulate commerce within the economy, or within the colonial economy, that is. In this case, the Stamp Act was a direct money-making operation. They're trying to raise revenue to help pay for war debt. And clearly, it was an attempt to get money from the colonies to help them pay for it. And it was done so without consent of any of the colonial assemblies or colonists themselves. You're setting a very dangerous precedent, Britain. Okay? You're taxing the colonists. Yeah, you're making money, but you're taxing the colonists and not giving them any sort of opportunity to say anything about it. Not even an opportunity to say anything about it. A lot of folks figured that they could just kind of stumble around and just be like, well, you're going to get taxed. So the Virginia House of Burgesses met. Patrick Henry was a planter and an attorney in Virginia, and he gave the Virginia House a speech about how the king was acting tyrannically. It was believed that, well, they are, if they don't revise their present line of thinking and their present policies, this is just going to continue in acts of tyranny. And that started to raise eyebrows, and he came up with the idea of various different resolutions advocating that Virginians have the right to levy taxes unto themselves, and that Parliament should seek permission from the various different assemblies first. These were known as the Virginia Resolves. Furthermore, to lobby on behalf of the colonists, you had Benjamin Franklin actually go to London himself. A few things about Benjamin Franklin. If you've ever seen a $100 bill, that's Ben Franklin. It's all about the Benjamins, right? Okay. Benjamin Franklin is one of our founding fathers. He happens to be my favorite founding father. The reason why Benjamin Franklin is my favorite is because he is the true epitome of a self-made man in a true American image. Benjamin Franklin was one of about 17 children. I believe he was the 15th out of 17 children. His dad was a candle maker. His mom was a homemaker. Okay? They didn't have very much. They just had a lot of kids. Okay? His mom was chronically pregnant. Okay? That's a tough life. And with a lot of kids, he was born in Boston, raised in Boston, and when he came of age, he was actually an indentured servant unto his older brother, who became quite abusive with his younger brother Ben. And in retaliation, Ben Franklin aimed to escape Boston. He wanted to leave Boston and leave the wrath of his older brother, who was an abuser. So he eventually tried to make his way to New York, and after a short while, wasn't successful in New York, so he continued on down the coast and made his way into Philadelphia. And he became a servant in a printing shop in Philadelphia. Eventually, he would become so skilled with a new print press that he would form his own print shop eventually and produce various different publications that would go out in circulation all throughout Philadelphia and then eventually throughout all of the colonies. Benjamin Franklin developed from a very poor indentured servant into a very successful printer. And his printing exploits gained him so much attention and clout that he would eventually be named Postmaster General in British North America overall. He came from nothing. Eventually, he would be a nobleman. Back in the colonial times of that era, there was nobility, gentlemen, a gentry, if you will, class, of which Ben Franklin was not. But he kind of broke the mold. He became a true rags to riches story when he developed all this clout, all because he started that print press in Philadelphia. So Philadelphia is the city of brotherly love. Benjamin Franklin's mark is all over Philadelphia. Don't tell that to Eagles fans because they're terrible. Go Cowboys. But otherwise, though, Benjamin Franklin is truly self-made. And he was not befriended by a number of nobility gentry type folks at the time because he wasn't one of them. He wasn't born into privilege. He worked his way up. And he was incredibly intelligent. Eventually, Benjamin Franklin would start experimenting with science, and he's often thought of as being not the inventor of electricity, but somebody who understood that electricity could have great value. When he flew his kite with the key in it, and the lightning hit the kite, and it conducted a charge, and that scientific discovery was seen all throughout Europe, back in Britain itself, and then in France. Oh, the French loved them some Benjamin Franklin. And Europeans at the time in general thought that these British North American provincial colonials were just kind of folksy and country and just kind of dumb and stupid and unsophisticated. They're so provincial. When in reality, you have some really intelligent people like Benjamin Franklin. But if you look kind of cute and kind of folksy, like you're going to play a banjo, you're just so cute, they're just going to love you. Right? Okay. Well, Benjamin Franklin plays that part. But Ben Franklin, because of his clout within British North America, makes his way to London. All this time that Benjamin Franklin was building himself into a self-made man, he considered himself a true British subject. He was British. That's how he identified. He actually would move to London for a number of years in the 1750s after a stint as postmaster, and he loved his time in London. He also lived in France for a number of years as well. So this kind of folksy type guy moved to France, and he also lived in London. After all, he felt he was British. He was British. Okay? But then something happened. Shortly after the Stamp Act was enacted, delegates in in British North America wanted to do something. They wanted to reason with Parliament. They wanted to say, look, Parliament, it's not so much that you're levying taxes, it's the way that you're doing it without any of our consent. You're doing so forcefully. We don't have any say in the matter. You're acting tyrannically. Your king is acting tyrannically. Parliament's acting tyrannically. Why don't we send Benjamin Franklin to talk about maybe allowing the colonial assemblies to levy taxes and give some sort of authority, or maybe perhaps add some sort of colonial representation in Parliament to where at least we'll have some sort of a say, at least we'll have some sort of decision as far as to our own entity, and that way you're not going to levy taxes against us. Benjamin Franklin speaks to British Parliament, and he pleads the case. And he is essentially laughed out of the room. They chastise him, tell him that he's speaking treasonously, that he has no right, the colonials are just provincials, they don't matter, you'll do as we say and you're going to like it. We're going to levy taxes, we fought a war on your behalf, on your territory, we're going to make you pay for it, Benjamin Franklin. They basically laughed him out of Parliament. That began the Americanization of Benjamin Franklin. That was a guy who was a very proud British subject who identified as British his entire life. But as he neared the age of 60, he eventually started to Americanize. And he realized, I think we're something different here. I'm no longer British. I'm really starting to identify, I don't like this parliamentary action. Something's different. We are different than what Parliament is giving us credit. They're acting tyrannically. This is not good. We need to do something about this. Okay? Eventually, you would have various different organizations in the colonies coalesce, one of which was the Sons of Liberty, which was designed to specifically lobby tax collectors taxing on behalf of the Stamp Act. Okay? So they would gather and terrorize stamp agents, and in some cases even burn their houses down. Okay? Yikes. When news like that gets back to London, Parliament realizes, you know what? We will go ahead. We're going to repeal the Stamp Act. But several other things are going to happen. We need to raise money, and we need to raise and increase our authority. We are going to implement the Declaratory Act. And in 1766, the Declaratory Act was enacted, and essentially the Declaratory Act mandated that Parliament has control of the colonies in all cases whatsoever. No representation. Parliament says we know better than you, than what you know. Parliament is the ultimate authority in British North America, and you're going to like it. That is our official declaration. Make no mistake about it. That's a pretty firm message to the colonists. So yeah, we're going to repeal the Stamp Act, but we're going to make something else clear, provincials. We say. What we say goes. We have authority in all cases whatsoever. Okay. So, several other different things happen. For one, William Pitt, one of the organizers of Britain's war effort in the French and Indian War, was actually named Prime Minister. And shortly after he was named Prime Minister, he would fall ill. And so oftentimes he would be unable to act. So you had Charles Townshend, who would act as Prime Minister in William Pitt's absence, and he would enact other different things that served as grievances for the colonists, one of which was the Quartering Act of 1765, which meant that colonists were required to shelter and provide provisions for British troops in British North America. Okay, I've mentioned that a few different times. It wasn't so much that they were going to quarter troops, it's that they would be forced to do it, whether they liked it or not. Okay? If I had the option, yeah, if an American troop or Marine or sailor or airman or whatever, if they needed a place to live and I had something, here's a room to rent, brother, thank you for your service, I appreciate you. Okay? But if the federal government forced me to do it, that would be a problem. Okay? I would not like that at all. But it just goes to show that Parliament is acting coercively. Okay? You also enacted the Townshend duties unto New Yorkers so as to keep various different goods, especially like paper and tea, lead, from being traded only with Britain. They cannot be traded elsewhere. Okay? So what you have are various other different transactions that are now being forcibly imposed upon various different colonies. New York was specifically sought because New York City had a large port. Okay, you have a large number of imports. You have a new non-importation agreement, and Parliament singles out New York in particular. And it was done so to not antagonize all of the colonies, but you're going to send a message home. However, the prevailing thought among the colonials altogether was, if they can single out New York and the New York Assembly and make things very difficult for them to trade elsewhere, who's to say they can't do that for the rest of us? We Virginians haven't always gotten along with New York. We're competitors for power. But we fear coercive acts unto our assembly. We side with New York. Rightfully so.